When the fog rolls in, something ancient seems to move inside it. From a West Virginia widow who hears her name in the mist and wakes to enormous barefoot prints circling her cabin, to an Oregon hiker whose collapsed tent and giant tracks are all that remain, these encounters feel too real to ignore. In this video, we'll uncover 6 mist-shrouded encounters that reveal the heavy step, unsettling signs, and eerie intelligence hiding in the fog. On March 17, 2025, Margaret, a 67-year-old widow, lived alone in a small wooden cabin deep within the Appalachian woods of West Virginia. She had chosen this quiet life years earlier, away from the noise of towns and roads, finding comfort in the sound of wind and birds. Each morning, she followed the same routine, walking through the trees to gather sticks for her fire. The forest was peaceful, her only company the rustle of branches and the steady creak of her boots against the damp soil. That calm morning changed when a thick mist began to form between the pines. The fog rolled in fast, heavy and pale, wrapping the ground in stillness. Every sound vanished. The birds stopped singing, and even the wind fell quiet. Margaret paused, clutching her basket, unsure of what had caused such silence. The air grew dense and cold, her breath hanging motionless in front of her. Then came a low sound, deep, rough, almost human, but not. It rolled through the fog, vibrating the air. She froze, her heart thudding. The tone carried something unsettling, a slow and gravelly awareness that made her skin prickle. She turned in circles, eyes searching through the white haze, but there was nothing. The forest around her seemed alive yet empty. Footsteps followed, heavy, measured, circling. They sank deep into the soft ground, one after another, as if something large moved just beyond sight. Shadows flickered, shapes stretched between tree trunks, vanishing before she could focus. Each step came closer, deliberate and slow, until they seemed to move in a full circle around her clearing. Margaret's chest tightened. She dropped her basket and began walking fast toward her cabin, fighting the pull of the thick air. Branches snapped behind her, the sound sharp and close. The fog grew so dense she could barely see her hands. Panic drove her forward. The narrow trail seemed endless, twisting through pale trunks until her cabin appeared at last, a faint outline through the mist. She rushed inside and bolted the door, sinking against it as her pulse hammered in her ears. Outside, the silence stretched again, long and deep. Then came 3 slow knocks on the wall, heavy and spaced apart. Something large brushed past the window, shaking the frame. A wet, uneven breathing pressed against the thin glass, steady but unnatural. Margaret stayed still through the night, gripping her blanket, waiting for morning to break. When the first light came, the fog lifted, revealing clear air and still trees. But the soil around her cabin told a different story. Enormous barefoot prints, each longer than her arm, sank deep into the earth, some dragging slightly, as though the creature had stumbled or leaned close. The forest seemed to hold its breath again, and Margaret realized her quiet life had changed forever. Something had found her, and it had spoken her name. The sunlight touched the clearing gently, but the world around the cabin felt wrong, heavy, and still. Margaret stepped outside with slow, cautious movements, her eyes scanning every corner of the yard. The marks around the cabin were deep and uneven, as if the ground itself had been pulled down by enormous weight. Her firewood pile had been moved and lined neatly beside the wall, though she had not done it. The air was damp, carrying a faint, earthy smell mixed with something unfamiliar, something that burned faintly in her throat when she breathed. She walked to the print and knelt close. They sank into the soil with clear shape and depth, far larger than any human could make. Some were spaced widely, others dragged slightly, the motion suggesting something that had paused or turned. The ground between them looked pressed flat, smooth and deliberate. Nearby, her small bucket sat overturned, its handle resting against the step, as though it had been set there purposefully. The forest stood silent, not a single sound breaking the quiet. She stared at the trees, their trunks pale in the soft morning light. each one seeming to hide a watcher behind it. Her heart thudded, slow and heavy, and she backed toward her cabin again, shutting the door firmly. The hours crawled by. She tried to focus on small tasks, boiling water and folding blankets, yet her mind drifted again and again to the fog, the voice, and the heavy breathing outside the window. By afternoon, she decided to visit the nearest road several miles away. The path wound down through thick brush and rocky slope. As she walked, she noticed branches bent low, their ends snapped clean as though twisted by strong hands. A faint set of impressions followed along the path beside hers, wide, deep, and silent. Panic grew with every step. She hurried faster, her breath visible in short bursts, but the marks continued alongside until they faded suddenly near the stream. The water moved quietly, untouched. When she finally reached the dirt road, the world felt empty again, yet eyes seemed to follow her even there. She did not see anyone, only the shifting of shadows against the distant tree line. She returned to her home before dusk, locking the doors and windows tightly. That night passed without sound, though her dreams were filled with the same deep, gravelly tone echoing from nowhere. Days turned into weeks, and Margaret began to notice more subtle changes. Each morning, something in her yard was different. Stones arranged in lines, tools moved from one corner to another, faint prints pressed into damp soil after rain. No harm came to her, but the sense of being observed never faded. Locals said she had grown fearful of her own imagination, but those who visited her cabin felt the same strange pressure in the air, as though something unseen lingered close, studying, waiting for her silence to break again. On February 11, 2018, forest rangers were sent deep into the Siberian taiga after a supply drone sent back unusual heat readings from an isolated part of the forest. The area was far from any marked route, covered in endless snow and heavy pine trees. After hours of travel through the cold, the small team reached a clearing where an old wooden hunting hut stood half-buried under thick frost. Its roof sagged with ice, and the forest around it was silent, without any movement or bird calls. As the rangers approached, they noticed strange signs on the snow outside. Deep, bare footprints surrounded the hut in wide loops. Each print was massive, far larger than any human step, with clear shapes pressed deep into the frozen surface. The marks circled the hut several times before disappearing into the woods. Nearby, faint scratches ran along the base of the wall, spreading upward to the logs that supported the roof. The lines looked as if made by claws rather than tools. The door was locked from the inside. The team forced it open, and a heavy stillness filled the air. Two bodies lay near the center of the small room. The man was slumped against the wall beside a table, while the woman rested near the stove, her hand frozen around a small lantern. Neither showed signs of violence. Their faces were stiff, pale, and frozen in expressions of fear that made the room feel colder than the air outside. Inside, nothing looked stolen or disturbed by animals. Supplies were neatly arranged on shelves. A kettle sat untouched near the fire pit. The window was unbroken, and the snow outside lay smooth, showing no sign of escape or entry. It was as if they had died suddenly while waiting for something that never came. The team checked for gas leaks or food poisoning, but found nothing. Tools, bags, and clothes were all in place, undamaged. However, the air inside the hut was strange, dense and quiet, carrying a faint metallic scent. When one ranger stepped near the window, frost fell from the beams above as if something heavy had brushed past earlier. Outside, the footprints seemed fresh despite the snowfall. The team measured one of them and realized each was nearly twice the length of a boot. There were no animal signs, no wolf tracks, no broken branches, and no bird movement. Even the usual distant sounds of the taiga were gone. As dusk settled, fog began to creep in between the trees. The rangers felt the temperature drop sharply. The snow near the prints shimmered as if something beneath the surface was shifting. They left quickly, marking the area for later return. None of them spoke on the way back, but each carried the same thought. The couple had not died from cold or hunger. Something else had been there, something large, silent, and close enough to watch. Days later, the forest remained wrapped in silence. When the investigation team returned, the clearing looked unchanged. The same heavy quiet hung over the trees. Snow had fallen again. Yet the deep marks around the building remained visible, their edges too defined to be old. No wind had erased them. The cold felt sharper there than anywhere else in the region, and even the sound of the ranger's steps seemed swallowed by the air. Inside the hut, the bodies were gone, taken for examination. The room appeared undisturbed, yet something felt altered. A faint frost line traced the floor where the man had once sat. The woman's place near the stove was marked by thin cracks spreading outward in circular shapes. A metallic odor lingered in the air, stronger than before, clinging to the wood as if absorbed. Tools had been left untouched, yet one window pane had shattered from the inside overnight, though there were no signs of pressure or impact. Reports filed in the nearby town described natural causes and hypothermia, but local hunters disagreed. They spoke of strange snowfalls that came without wind, of sudden fog that rolled low to the ground and carried no sound. Those who passed near the region claimed their compasses spun aimlessly and their radios went silent. The wildlife avoided the place completely. No wolf or bear had entered the clearing since the day the rangers found the couple. Even birds flew around the area in wide arcs, never crossing directly above it. Weeks passed before another patrol was sent. The new team arrived under clearer skies, yet they felt the same weight of stillness pressing against them. The hut's door was frozen open. The deep tracks in the snow had returned, circling the structure once again, as if something had revisited during the night. Near the outer wall, the scratches on the logs had grown deeper, stretching higher toward the roof beams. Beneath the window, faint claw marks appeared to form uneven symbols that no one could recognize. No one could explain what had happened there, but those who saw the site in person spoke of shapes that seemed to move at the edge of the fog, distant yet unmistakably watching. Officials dismissed it as a trick of light, yet the memory of those enormous tracks remained vivid in every mind that entered the clearing. Months later, no one volunteered to go near that forest. The hut remained untouched, half buried by new snow. Locals warned travelers not to approach the valley where fog gathered without reason. They claimed the air there carried a sound too low to hear, but heavy enough to feel, a vibration beneath the chest like an unseen breath. The incident faded from official records, but stories continued to spread through nearby villages. Each version ended the same way, a warning about the hidden watcher that left no wounds, no trace of attack, only stillness, fear, and marks too deliberate to belong to any known creature. On March 6, 2024, long-haul trucker Carla drove her loaded rig through a lonely stretch of Oregon Route 38. The road wound between dark pine ridges, the only light coming from her headlights cutting through the gray night. The air hung heavy with moisture, and soon a wall of thick fog slid across the highway. It was sudden, like a curtain drawn between her and the world, turning everything ahead into a pale, shapeless tunnel. The radio lost signal. The hum of the tires on wet asphalt became the only sound. She leaned forward, eyes wide, the dashboard glowing faintly in the haze. Her truck's beams reached barely a few yards before fading into the dense mist. Every signpost and tree shadow turned ghost-like, vanishing the moment it appeared. Then, out of nowhere, a dark mass stood at the side of the road. It was massive, hunched, but towering even in that position, with shoulders so wide that they stretched far beyond what any man could have. For an instant, the lights glimmered across its outline, showing a dense, uneven texture, something between fur and shadow. The figure did not move, but the air around it seemed to tighten. Carla's hands jerked on the wheel, and the truck screeched as the brakes locked. The heavy trailer rattled behind her, its metal frame moaning in protest. she felt her heart pounding in her chest, frozen by the impossible shape standing only feet away. Then, as she blinked against the brightness of her headlights cutting through the fog, it was gone. The road was empty, only the thick mist twisting slowly across the lanes. For a moment, the silence was complete. Then, faintly, came a sound from behind the truck. It was steady, heavy, and uneven, footsteps pressing into soft ground. They faded slowly as she forced herself to keep driving, eyes glued to the mirror. The fog swallowed everything again. She continued for miles before stopping at a rest area. When she stepped out, the night felt colder and heavier. She walked along the shoulder, her boots crunching into damp gravel, and saw the impressions. They were deep, broad, and bare, not shaped like shoes or tires, but like enormous feet pressed straight into the soil. Each print was twice the size of her own. They led away from the highway and vanished into the black wall of forest that bordered the road. Her report to the patrol the next morning brought no explanation. Radar had shown nothing unusual, and no cameras along the route recorded movement. Yet she could not forget the shape, the stillness, and the slow sound of steps vanishing into the mist. Locals later spoke of watchers in fog, beings that waited for the silence of the road to return, appearing only when someone looked too closely into the gray. The following morning was clear. The fog burned away by sunlight, leaving the highway quiet and empty. Patrol officers visited the stretch where the sighting had happened. Tire marks showed where the truck had skidded, the rubber streaks cutting through the road's edge, but nothing else explained what had caused it. The soft earth along the shoulder was disturbed, but only in a small area, where the soil sank deeper than expected, as though something heavy had stepped there and moved on. The footprints were measured carefully. Each impression was bare, deep, and uneven, pressing straight down into the wet dirt. They continued for several yards before stopping abruptly at the edge of the forest. No return trail existed, no sign of where the creature had gone. The surrounding brush was untouched, the trees unmarked, as though it had passed without disturbing anything around it. Carla's report was logged, and for days the officers compared her account to other strange calls made over the years. There were a few scattered notes from long ago, describing shapes seen through fog, engines stalling, or strange sounds in the stillness of the highway. None had proof. Her description matched those older records in detail. The size, the stillness, the way it seemed to vanish as if the fog had swallowed it whole. Highway maintenance crews later checked the stretch for possible damage. They found deep scratches on a guardrail near the same bend, marks too high for any vehicle. The metal bent inward slightly, as if struck by great force. No paint or debris was left behind. The workers marked it as a weather-related effect, though several whispered that the pattern looked like something pressed by an enormous hand. Weeks passed, and her story spread among other drivers. Some laughed, while others began slowing their speed whenever the gray mist rolled down from the hills. A few claimed that at night, headlights sometimes reflected faint shapes near the tree line, always gone the moment anyone looked again. No two reports matched perfectly, but all described the same uneasy feeling, a watcher waiting just out of sight. The State Patrol closed their file, listing it under unknown wildlife observation. Yet those who drove that highway often enough knew something was different about that curve. The air there felt thicker, the silence heavier. Even animals seemed to avoid the place. Birds never perched on the road signs, and no insects buzzed near the lights. Carla continued her routes, but refused to take that road again. Each time fog covered her windshield, she felt the same cold weight in her chest, remembering the night when a shadow larger than reason had stared back at her through the mist. To this day, Oregon Route 38 remains quiet after dark. When the fog returns and the wind falls still, drivers say the road hums faintly, like the sound of slow, measured steps keeping pace beside them, vanishing again before anyone can prove they were ever there. On October 21st, 2017, a group of hunters arrived at Shadow Creek, a quiet valley deep in the Appalachian Mountains. The air was cool, the sky overcast, and fog drifted lazily through the trees. The group included Aaron, Paul, Jonah, and Naomi, who had come for deer and trout along the calm waters. They set up camp by the creek's edge, where pine shadows stretched long across the ground. That evening, the hunters cleaned their catch, laughing over their success, unaware that something unseen had already begun to move among the trees. As night fell, a thick mist rolled down from the ridges, swallowing the camp in gray haze. The light from the fire dimmed, flickering weakly through the heavy air. Every sound became distant, as if the forest had drawn closer. A low rustling came from beyond the tree line, steady and deep, like footsteps too heavy for any man. Aaron turned toward the sound, but only the fog answered back. The others froze, each feeling a weight in the air that pressed against the skin. Hours later, the camp grew still again. The hunters retreated to their tents, yet none could sleep. Somewhere beyond the haze, something moved. Slow, deliberate, circling. The air vibrated with faint, guttural tones that blended with the whisper of the wind. When morning came, the fog still hung low over the ground, dampening color and sound alike. They stepped outside and stopped. Half their fish were gone, and the deer they had hung for cleaning had been dragged several feet, turned on its side as though examined. No drag lines marked the ground. No footprints led to or from the carcass, except for the enormous bare impressions surrounding the tents, pressed deep into the soft soil before vanishing into the mist. Confusion turned to unease. Naomi, a skilled tracker, set out to follow the faint signs leading north toward the slope, her instincts guiding her through the pale air. The men stayed behind to clean the camp, glancing at the trees as shapes seemed to shift in the distance. Hours passed, and Naomi did not return. The fog thickened again, swallowing the trail. Aaron called her name, but the sound vanished before it could travel. When they finally went searching, they found her boots neatly placed beside a narrow clearing, her pack lying open on a moss-covered rock. Nearby, the bark of the trees bore long, fresh scratches, deep and uneven. Beneath the branches, faint impressions marked the ground, wide, flat, and spaced as if left by something walking upright. A heavy stillness settled over the forest. The hunters felt watched, every movement weighed by unseen eyes. As the light faded, they grabbed what they could and fled toward the trailhead, their breath loud in the cold air. Behind them, the fog rolled again through Shadow Creek, swallowing every sound, leaving only the quiet memory of what had taken Naomi beyond the trees. When the group reached the valley's edge, the fog thinned, revealing the pale sky above the ridges. They did not stop until the trees grew sparse and the sound of water faded behind them. Their hearts pounded, and their breathing came in short bursts, driven more by terror than by exhaustion. They left the camp abandoned, unwilling to return for the missing woman. By the next day, forest rangers arrived after receiving the call for help. The hunters waited at the station, their clothes damp and faces hollow. They described the fog, the strange footprints, and the silent clearing where their companion had vanished. The rescuers followed the trail to the campsite, but the valley was wrapped again in a thick gray mist that made every shadow stretch and twist. The ground felt soft and heavy under their boots, sinking with each step. When they reached the tents, the camp appeared untouched from a distance, but the details unsettled everyone. The nets for the fish hung limp, their ropes still wet but empty. The deer carcass lay several yards away, moved and positioned at an odd angle, as though turned by careful hands. Around the edges of the clearing, faint prints pressed deep into the soil, wide and long, each separated by a distance too great for any known creature. The rescuers measured them and found them larger than human, yet with a clear shape resembling bare feet. A few followed the trail leading north toward the clearing where the boots had been discovered. The air was unnaturally quiet, and no birds sang. On the trees nearby, deep gouges stretched upward, some curling slightly as if carved in motion. The moss on the stones was crushed in smooth, wide curves. It felt as though the ground itself had been molded by something immense and patient. Yet no sign of the missing woman could be found. When the fog finally lifted, search teams scanned the slopes and riverbanks for days, but the only clue that remained was the smell of damp earth mixed with a faint metallic tang that no one could explain. The official report concluded that poor visibility and confusion led to separation and loss. Still, those who had entered the woods that morning left unsettled, speaking quietly of shapes that had shifted within the mist and the strange pressure in the air that seemed to follow them back to camp. Weeks later, hikers who passed through the area claimed to have seen dim movements within the fog, always keeping their distance but never fully disappearing. Others said that strange lines appeared on the bark of nearby trees, curling into spiral patterns that had not been there before. Locals began avoiding the valley altogether, warning travelers that the fog around Shadow Creek was not simply weather. They said it carried something older and aware, something that watched from the mist, taking the curious and leaving only the quiet rhythm of its steps fading into the gray. On February 9th, 2025, two friends named Lena and Marcus began a skiing trip high in the Swiss Alps. The air was sharp and thin, and the sky stretched clear over the frozen peaks. They planned to explore a quiet ridge far from the usual trails, where snow lay untouched, and the view reached endlessly across the white slopes. Morning sun glimmered against the ice, but by afternoon, clouds rolled low across the mountains, turning the air heavy and gray. A cold fog soon swallowed the ridge, making it hard to see more than a few steps ahead. The wind picked up without warning, cutting through their clothes. Snowflakes drifted sideways, blurring the path. Lena suggested stopping near a cluster of rocks to wait until the weather cleared. The two leaned their skis against a slope and unpacked a small meal. The silence felt thick, the kind of quiet that hides movement. As they rested, faint crunching sounds echoed from below, uneven and slow. Marcus thought it was shifting snow, but the steps were too heavy and spaced too far apart. Then came a low, deep rumble from the fog, a sound that did not belong to any wind or avalanche. The air itself seemed to vibrate. Lena looked toward the sound, but saw only mist swirling through the narrow pass. The next moment, a shadow appeared within the fog, massive, wide at the shoulders, standing upright. The shape moved with slow, deliberate motions, pausing between each step as if watching. Fear locked both of them in place. The shape vanished, but the silence that followed was worse. They could hear it moving again, circling them through the fog. Snow shifted behind them, then to their left. Heavy breathing rolled through the air, slow and uneven. They could feel its presence before they could see it again. Something slammed against the rocks, sending snow bursting upward. Lena stumbled and fell, scraping her arm against the ice. Marcus swung his ski pole, striking only air. A gust of wind followed, carrying another deep sound, half growl, half moan. Their gear clattered against the ground, skis sliding across the slope. Suddenly, Marcus was thrown backward, his jacket ripped at the shoulder. He rolled down the hill, landing near a buried ridge of snow. Lena crawled after him, legs shaking, heart racing. The air pulsed with heavy steps moving away, then stopping again, as if deciding whether to return. The fog began to thin as daylight faded. When silence finally returned, both sat frozen, bruised, and shaking. Torn gloves hung from their hands, scratches lined their skin, and their breath came in sharp bursts. They did not speak or move. The mountain had gone still again, but the feeling of being watched clung to them like the cold itself. Slowly, they forced themselves to stand, weak and unsteady, following the faint slope downhill. Their skis were gone, scattered far apart. The air felt strange, heavy with a smell they could not name, sharp and earthy, like stone and iron mixed together. Every few steps, the snow beneath their boots cracked, and the sound echoed louder than it should have. When the rescue team found them hours later, they were half buried in frost, clothes ripped, faces pale as paper. The rescuers wrapped them in blankets, shocked to see deep scratches on their arms and legs and long bruises along their ribs, marks that did not fit any fall or slide. The snow around them showed confusion, lines of struggle, broken drift, and footprints shaped like bare human feet, but enormous in size. Each print sank deeper than a man could press, wide at the heel, with clear toe shape visible even in the freezing wind. Back at the base camp, Lena and Marcus were treated for hypothermia. Both spoke little, their eyes distant. They said the fog had closed in, and something large had walked through it. Medical staff dismissed the words as the effect of fear and cold. But when the rescuers returned to collect their gear, they found the slope disturbed in strange ways. Their equipment was not scattered by wind. Poles and gloves stood upright in the snow, balanced carefully. A jacket was folded neatly against a rock, half covered in frost. Even the food bag was untouched. No wild animal would leave such order behind. Near a ridge, the rescue leader noticed more track, wider than any boot, tracing a curve around the open space before stopping abruptly near the cliff. There was no sign of a slide or fall, just an end, as though the maker had stepped out of existence. The snow above that point remained smooth, untouched by weather or time. News spread quietly through nearby villages. Some locals said that fog carried an ancient watcher, a being that crossed between mountains when silence was deepest. Others called it a trick of light, a vision shaped by exhaustion. But those who worked near that ridge stopped climbing when the clouds grew heavy, saying the air there still felt wrong. Lena and Marcus recovered their strength, yet both refused to return to the mountains. Each time they saw mist gather against a window or snow drift across a path, their hands began to shake. They could not explain what had followed them through the haze, only that it had not meant to kill them. It had studied them, surrounded them, and then left. The Alps stayed beautiful but colder, the memory of that silent figure hanging forever in the frozen mist that never fully clears. On April 14, 2023, a lone hiker named Mara started her journey into the Oregon Cascades, planning 7 days of quiet exploration. She packed her journal, sketch tools, and light gear, ready to travel deep into the forest she had studied for years. The morning was calm, sunlight filtering through tall trees, and birds moved freely above. But by late afternoon, the air thickened, and fog crept from the valleys, rolling across the ridges until it swallowed the trail completely. The path turned silent. No wind touched the leaves, no insects hummed. Mara slowed her pace, each step dull against the soft ground. As daylight dimmed, she chose a small clearing near a cluster of stones to set her tent. The fog pressed close, curling around her camp as though alive. She built a small fire, its light flickering weakly in the mist. Shapes seemed to form and vanish at its edge, moving too smoothly to be tricks of the eye. As darkness grew, faint thuds echoed through the trees, slow and heavy, spaced far apart. Each sound faded, replaced by another from a different direction. The forest no longer felt empty. The ground shivered beneath her, as if something large shifted nearby, its steps muffled by the thick fog. She sat near the flames, staring outward, but sight meant little now. The haze had become a wall. From beyond it came a deep, low vibration that made her breath catch. Branches creaked above, some snapping sharply far beyond her reach. Something unseen was moving. Mara's notebook lay open beside her, pages half filled with sketches of the cliffs and rivers she had passed that morning. She grabbed a pencil and began to draw, her hand moving fast, guided by fear more than thought. The shapes on the paper grew darker, long figures standing between trees, eyes glowing faintly through the mist. Each new line deepened the dread she felt, as if the images were reflections of what stood just outside her sight. The fire sputtered, sparks flying into the air. Then came a heavy sound, close, too close. The tent shifted, stakes lifted from the earth, ropes snapping, canvas folded as if pressed by weight from above. Mara stumbled back, heartbeat loud in her ears. The air carried a sharp smell of damp earth mixed with something wild. She turned toward the sound, but the fog only thickened, closing around her like a curtain. Hours passed without light or sound, except the distant crack of wood and the faint scrape of something against bark. By dawn, the forest returned to stillness. When searchers reached the clearing 2 days later, they found her tent collapsed, the fire still faintly warm. Her pack and boots were missing. On the ground nearby, huge bare footprints, twice her own size, circled the camp before fading into the fog. The morning after the discovery, search teams spread across the fog-covered forest. They moved carefully, marking every piece of evidence. The collapsed tent still carried faint warmth from the dying embers, and the soil near the fire pit showed signs of movement too large to match human step. Deep impressions curved around the site, perfectly spaced, as if something immense had circled with slow, deliberate pacing. The air was cold and unmoving, carrying no bird calls or forest noise. Investigators collected what remained of her supplies. Cooking tools, ropes, and paper sheets were stacked neatly near a fallen branch. The edges of each item aligned with strange precision. Her journal lay half open in the damp grass. The last sketches inside were rough and frantic, showing dark figures standing close to her camp, their eyes glowing through heavy mist. Some pages were torn, their edges smeared with mud. The trees surrounding the clearing bore marks unlike anything seen before. Long, shallow cuts ran in uneven spirals up the bark, and several trunks leaned forward as though something had pushed against them with enormous strength. Every mark appeared high above human reach. Park officials tried to record measurement, but snow and moisture blurred the outlines. Even the prints on the ground began to fade by noon, melting into the damp earth as if being erased by unseen hands. Teams expanded the search radius, following faint trails that led into thick clusters of pines. At one point, the line of prints split, circling back toward the original camp before disappearing into dense brush. No other human tracks were found. The missing boots and pack were never recovered. Near a narrow ridge, a strip of torn cloth caught on a branch was found fluttering weakly in the wind, but there was no trace of struggle. The fog hung heavier as evening approached, and rescuers retreated before dark, uneasy under the weight of the silence. Reports described the event as a hiking accident caused by weather and poor visibility. Officials closed the section of trail temporarily, citing safety concerns. Yet locals from nearby towns refused to accept that explanation. Older residents whispered of strange watchers that moved unseen through the mountains, taller than any person, leaving no sound but slow, rhythmic step. Some claimed that these beings appeared only when fog thickened, as if the mist itself hid their presence. Weeks later, rangers revisited the site and found new details that deepened the mystery. Around the old fire pit, small stones had been arranged in a circle, each one balanced upright in the soil. The shape formed patterns that looked intentional, though no one could guess their meaning. Nearby, faint scratches appeared again on tree trunk, perfectly aligned, as if redrawn. No footprints were visible this time, only the strange markings and stillness. Mara's belongings were stored for study, but her drawings drew the most attention. The images shifted from landscapes to distorted figures, all with elongated arms and hollow eyes. Experts suggested fatigue and stress might have caused her to imagine shapes in the fog, yet the measured order of her note and the accuracy of her sketches suggested calm observation rather than panic. Months passed, and the forest swallowed the evidence. Travelers who entered that area reported strange echoes that followed their step, like faint breathing just beyond the trees. Others claimed to feel watched whenever the clouds descended low across the slope. No one stayed overnight. The story of the vanished hiker spread quietly, each retelling adding to the unease surrounding that mountain trail. To this day, no trace of her has been found. The forest remains untouched, its mist drifting endlessly across the ridges. Some say she became part of it, lost to something vast and silent that still walks among the fog, unseen but always aware of those who come too close.